The night my grandmother was buried, my half-brother handed me a check for $8,000 and told me to be grateful. $8,000 after everything. I stood in the kitchen of the house I grew up visiting every summer, the one on Chemin des Érables outside Gatineau, with the wraparound porch and the wood stove that clicked all night in January. And I looked at that check and I thought, he actually thinks this is over. It wasn't over. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the morning of the funeral, because that's where it really started. That's where I first understood what the last 2 years had actually been. My grandmother, Mémé everyone called her, though her name was Colette, died on a Tuesday in late March. The call came at 6 a.m. My phone buzzed on the nightstand and it was my half-brother, and the first thing he said wasn't "she's gone" or "it happened this morning." The first thing he said was, "The funeral home needs a family contact by 9. I'm putting myself down." That was it. That was the whole call. I sat on the edge of my bed in my apartment in Ottawa and I held the phone against my chest and I cried for a long time. Not about the funeral home, about Mémé. About the last time I saw her, 8 months earlier, before my half-brother had quietly arranged for her to move into a facility in Aylmer that didn't allow drop-in visits without coordinating with the family first. He was the family, he'd made sure of that. Mémé raised me from age 9 after my mother's accident. My half-brother, my father's son from his first marriage, had grown up 3 provinces away in Calgary and visited maybe twice a decade. But when my father died 4 years ago and left Mémé as the last one standing, my half-brother materialized. That's the only word for it. He just appeared, suddenly very interested in the woman he'd called Dad's French lady for 30 years. I should have understood then what was happening. I should have seen it for what it was. I didn't, or maybe I did, and I didn't want to believe it. The funeral was held at a small church in the Outaouais. The one Mémé had attended every Sunday since 1971. She had friends there, real friends. Women she'd known for 50 years who brought her butter tarts at Christmas and drove her to her eye appointments when her license expired. I assumed they'd all be there. When I arrived, the parking lot was half empty. My half-brother was standing at the door in a dark suit I'd never seen before, greeting people as they came in. His wife was beside him, her hand resting on his arm. They looked like they'd been doing this their whole lives, managing things, receiving condolences, belonging to the moment in a way that felt very deliberate. He saw me, something shifted in his expression. Not grief, not relief, something more careful than either of those. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "She was my grandmother," I said. He nodded slowly, like this was a position he'd heard before and found mildly interesting. "We kept the service small, family only. It's what she wanted." I looked around at the room, at Mémé's neighbour from Chemin des Érables, who'd brought her soup every time she had a cold for 23 years, sitting alone in the back. At Father Laplante, who'd known her since before I was born. "These aren't family," I said. "These are the people we invited," he said, and he moved past me to greet someone else. I found a seat near the middle. His wife watched me the whole time. The reception afterward was held at the house. Mémé's house, the one on Chemin des Érables. My half-brother had arranged it. He'd also, I noticed when I arrived, already removed several items from the living room. The armoire that had stood beside the front door since before I was born, the small oil painting of the Gatineau hills that Mémé had bought at a church sale in 1988 and loved completely out of proportion to what it probably cost. Gone. I didn't say anything yet. I was still figuring out the shape of what I was walking into. There were maybe 20 people in the house. My half-brother moved through the rooms with his wife, accepting hugs, telling small stories about Mémé that were technically accurate and somehow completely wrong, the way you can describe a person using only facts and still make them unrecognizable. I was standing near the kitchen when his wife found me. She was pleasant about it. That was the thing I remember most. How pleasant she was, the way you're pleasant when you've decided the conversation is already over and you're just notifying the other party. "This is going to be a hard time for everyone," she said. "We just want to handle things cleanly, without any drama." "I'm not planning any drama," I said. "Of course," she smiled. "We're going to be putting the house on the market in the spring. There are some legal things to sort out first, but we want to move quickly. It's easier that way." I looked at her. Mémé owned this house outright. "It goes through the estate." Yes, she said, still smiling. And he's the executor. She updated the will 2 years ago. 2 years ago, right around the time my half-brother had started showing up regularly. Right around the time Mémé's phone had started going to voicemail when I called. I'd like to see the will, I said. Of course, she said again. Your brother can share whatever the lawyer releases. But just so you know where things stand, she left you her jewelry and some personal effects. There's also a small amount. We thought $8,000 was a fair acknowledgement, given everything. She said given everything the way people say it when they mean given how little you matter. I kept my face very still. I'd learned to do that a long time ago, in courtrooms, mostly. I work as a paralegal for an estate litigation firm in Ottawa. I've sat through a lot of conversations where someone tried to tell me, gently, that the document I was looking at meant something other than what it said. I'll need to see the will, I said again, and the date it was executed. And the lawyer who drafted it. Her smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. I'll let him know you're asking, she said, and walked away. What I didn't tell anyone that day, was that I'd spoken to Mémé's previous lawyer 18 months earlier. His name was Mr. Arsenal, and he'd called me out of the blue one afternoon, which struck me as unusual, and asked if I had time for a coffee. We met at a Tim Hortons near his office in Hull. He was a careful man, the kind who chooses words like he's choosing which floorboards to step on. He told me he was no longer acting for my grandmother. He said she'd been assisted in finding new representation. He said he was telling me this as a professional courtesy, and that he couldn't say more than that, but that if I were a granddaughter who cared about an elderly woman's interests, I might want to pay close attention to the documents that came out of the next year or two. He paid for the coffee. He wished me luck. He left. I went home and I started keeping records. Every call I made to Mémé that went unanswered, I logged. Every visit my half-brother blocked, always with a reason, always polite. She's tired, she had a bad night, the doctor said she needs rest. I documented. I kept the voicemails where she sounded confused in ways she hadn't been before. I had her assessed by her own physician, separate from the facility my half-brother had chosen, and I kept those records too. And 8 months before she died, Mémé managed to reach me. She called from the facility's landline at 7 in the morning on a Wednesday. She sounded more like herself than she had in months. Sharp, a little nervous, speaking fast like she was afraid of being interrupted. She told me she didn't understand some of the papers she'd signed. She told me she trusted me. She said there was a box in the closet of the second bedroom at the house on Chemin des Érables behind the winter coats, and that I should find it when the time came. She said, "Don't let him have everything. You know what's right." That was the last real conversation we had. The afternoon of the funeral reception, I slipped upstairs. The house was noisy enough that no one noticed. I went to the second bedroom, my old room, the one with the window that looked out over the backyard where Mémé had grown tomatoes every summer until her knees gave out. The closet still smelled like cedar and the particular wool of her winter coats. The box was there. A shoebox, actually, from a pair of boots she'd bought in 2019. Inside, a USB drive, a sealed envelope addressed to a notary in Gatineau named Ms. Beaupre, and a handwritten note to me. I won't share everything she wrote. Some of it is just for me. But the relevant part said, I signed things I didn't understand. I was not myself when I signed them. Eve-Marie witnessed everything. She will tell the truth. Eve-Marie was Mémé's neighbor, the one who'd brought her soup for 23 years, the one sitting alone in the back of the church that morning. I took the box. I put it in my bag. I went back downstairs. My half-brother found me near the end of the afternoon, when most of the guests had left. He had 2 glasses of wine, Mémé's wine, from her own rack, which he'd apparently decided was now his, and he held one out to me like an offering. I took it. I didn't drink it. I think we got off on the wrong foot today, he said. He had the particular tone of someone who has rehearsed this. This has been hard for everyone. It has, I agreed. I want to be fair to you, he said. I hope you know that. She loved you. I know she loved you. She did, I said. The 8,000, I want you to know that wasn't a dismissal. There are debts against the estate. The facility wasn't cheap. There are costs people don't think about. He paused. I'm trying to do right by everyone. I looked at him over the rim of the glass. He had my father's eyes, which I'd always found disorienting. What was the date on the new will? I asked. His expression didn't change. I'd have to check with the lawyer. Was she assessed before she signed it? Cognitive capacity assessment. Standard practice for someone her age. That's a very clinical way to talk about your grandmother. It's a very standard way to handle estate planning for someone in her 80s, I said. Was there an assessment? I think you should talk to the lawyer. I will, I said. I also think you should know that I've been in contact with Mr. Arsenal and with Miss Beaupre, and that I have documentation going back 22 months. I set the wineglass down on the counter. I work in estate litigation. I've helped build cases that looked a lot like this one. He was very still. I'm not looking for a fight, I said, and I meant it. I'm looking for what was actually hers to give and what wasn't. Those are different things. His wife appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. She must have been listening from the hall. You need to be careful, she said. Her pleasant voice had gone somewhere else. Accusations like that, against family, they have consequences. I'm not making accusations, I said. I'm asking questions. There's a difference. I picked up my bag. I'll be in touch through my firm's legal team. Have your lawyer contact us directly. I walked out the front door. It was raining, that thin, cold March rain that doesn't quite commit to being snow, and I stood on the porch for a moment and breathed it in. I thought about Mémé on that porch in July, shelling peas in a colander, the radio on through the screen door. I thought about her voice on the phone at 7 a.m., nervous and quick, trusting me with a shoebox full of evidence. I got in my car. I drove back to Ottawa. I called my colleague Priya from the highway and told her to clear her morning. It took 4 months. I want to be honest about that, because I think people hear stories like this and imagine justice arrives quickly, like a door swinging open. It doesn't. It arrives through documents and depositions, and a lot of Tuesday afternoons in conference rooms that smell like old coffee. It arrives through a neighbor named Eve Marie who drove 40 minutes to give a sworn statement and cried twice during it, and didn't stop talking until she'd said everything she needed to say. The USB drive contained files, copies of documents Mémé had photographed herself, somehow painstakingly, with an iPad she wasn't supposed to have in the facility. Financial statements showing a joint account my half-brother had opened in both their names in the year before she died. Transfers. Not enormous ones, nothing so obvious, small enough to look like ordinary expenses, enough to add up. The will had been signed 11 days after Mémé's cognition assessment, an assessment that notably had flagged concerns that had not been disclosed to Mr. Arsenault before he was replaced. Concerns that the new lawyer, who it turned out had a professional relationship with my half-brother's Calgary business partner, had not followed up on. The notary, Ms. Beaupre, had been holding a letter from Mémé for 2 years. A letter that said, in Mémé's own handwriting, in French, that she did not believe the will she had signed reflected her true wishes, that she had felt pressured, and that she wanted her granddaughter, me, to have the house on Chemin des Aigerables. It wasn't a formal codicil, it wasn't ironclad, but combined with everything else, it was enough. My half-brother's lawyer called mine in July. They wanted to settle. The offer was the house and a formal accounting of the joint account transfers with repayment. I took it. Not because I was done being angry. I'm not sure I'll ever be completely done with that. But because Mémé asked me not to let him have everything, and the house was everything. The house was Sunday dinners and tomatoes in August and the smell of wood smoke and the particular creak of the third stair. The house was her. There are things I still think about. I think about my father, who chose my half-brother as a secondary executor without telling me, and whether he knew what he was setting in motion or whether he just didn't think carefully enough about who his son had become. I'll never know. He's been gone 4 years, and the dead don't revise their choices. I think about the facility, and whether someone there should have called me sooner, and whether the rules around coordinating with family are designed to protect residents or to protect the people managing them. I think about Mémé at 7 a.m. On a Wednesday, finding a way to reach me from a landline she wasn't supposed to have access to, because she was scared and she trusted me and she needed someone to pay attention. I paid attention. The house is mine now. It needs a new roof, and the plumbing in the upstairs bathroom is original from 1964, which my contractor described as ambitious. There are tomato seeds on the kitchen windowsill because I started them in February the way Mémé always did, in those little peat pellets that come in a bag from Canadian Tire. I drove out there last weekend and sat on the porch in the early evening and listened to the birds coming back from wherever birds go in winter. The wood stove was on. The third stair creaked when I came in. I am not the king of nothing, my half-brother told me that last afternoon in Mémé's kitchen, like it was a warning. But he handed me a check for $8,000 and called it fair. And I drove away in the rain with a shoebox on my passenger seat and my grandmother's voice still in my head, and I knew. The way you know things that come from somewhere deeper than logic, that fair wasn't finished yet. It's finished now.